Game of Thrones meets Star Wars. It's a match made in heaven and something the fandoms for both of these properties have talked about for a long time. Now, the creators of the Game of Thrones show, Dan and Dave, will helm a series of new Star Wars films. In this video, I want to cover why this is so particularly amazing and go over some of the backlash that has come from this news. Let's talk about it. What is up, YouTube? It's Josh. This is the Den of Nerds. We did that new intro, guys. Really curious what people think about it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're new here and you love Star Wars, subscribe to this channel. I am committed to doing all sorts of coverage about the galaxy far, far away. Oh, and shout out to Jordan Cleveland, who got the nerd card question correct in my Old Republic Star Wars movies video, which was the very first video I did after the Dan and Dave announcement. I really think they're going to go do the Old Republic movies. And if you want to find out why, go watch that video. I'll link it in the description down below. But let's get into the news of the day. I've had a couple, well, I guess one day to really think about the news of Dan and Dave developing new Star Wars films. And this feels like a total PR shift. It's so interesting to watch what happens with, brands like Star Wars with their own fandoms. But after The Last Jedi, things were looking a little bad. That Han Solo trailer really turned a lot of people's minds around. People got excited about that. It's a really good trailer. And then they dropped the news of Dan and Dave, which sounds like an incredible thing, right? This sounds like something that people would unanimously be excited for, but that's not exactly the case, as you are probably aware of. Now, I will cover the backlash and what I think about it at the end of this video, but we're starting with positives first. I want to talk about, as a big fan, why this is such a good fit for Star Wars. So back in 1977, and this sort of is reflected in the joint statement that Dan and Dave made, but back in 1977, when Star Wars first came out, you have to understand this film changed things. It basically inspired a ton of different filmmakers to go do what they were going to do. It inspired people that weren't even filmmakers to go out and do other things that they wanted to do. It was a change in the landscape of cinema, in the way that we produce these films, in the way that studios can sell these films, in merchandising. So many different things were changed because of Star Wars. Now you fast forward to when Game of Thrones is first being developed at HBO, and I think we are seeing the birth of something almost as culturally significant with the Game of Thrones property. So in similar ways, Game of Thrones has changed the way people interact with shows. What really started a lot of the YouTube theory crafters was Game of Thrones and the shows. It changed the way people make television. It changed the way people consume television. It's the most popular show of all time, and the ramifications of some of the things it has done are literally going to be felt, I would say, 50 years from now, maybe even beyond it. So what is very interesting is you have these guys who have played an active role in sort of making a complete shift in media and in the landscape of television. And they're very, very visionary. They've done this thing for an extended period of time. And, real quick side akbar here, they said series of films, right? They did not say a trilogy. So I really think that we could be looking at more than 3 films, and it might even be like a one a year on the streaming service type thing, but that's not really what I'm getting into. Back on my point, I just think it's really cool that we're getting guys that are that visionary, that have played a big role in changing things, to get back into a property that was the original game changer, right? Star Wars was the thing that changed the game. And I think it's quite awesome that these guys are going to take over. And I want to talk about some of the things they specifically do very well as showrunners and how I think that'll translate brilliantly over to the Star Wars universe. The first one is atmosphere. So one of the things that Game of Thrones does really, really well is, despite being in some very different areas, basically different locations, different characters. There's a lot of different sides of small stories being shown in Game of Thrones, and yet these very, very different places, these very, very different people, it all feels connected. And that has a lot to do with the atmosphere that they create for the show. It feels like a real lived-in world, and you can see how a certain part of the world would look a certain way and another one would look different. And it's been really cool to watch some of our characters go from different places and experience different things. I'm speaking specifically of season 1, when the Stark girls and Ned come from the north to King's Landing. Very, very cool. And yet when you're in King's Landing, it still has a Game of Thrones feel. Now, Star Wars is always jumping around to different planets. We're seeing different cantinas, we're seeing different aliens, different species, different ships, all sorts of variety. But the thing that ties it all together is atmosphere, the feel of it, the fact that it is Star Wars. It just has that feel. And I really think that Dan and Dave are going to shine in sort of cultivating that across a series of films. The other thing I specifically wanted to talk about when it comes to Star Wars is combat. These guys have done an incredible job of bringing in the right people to make combat on screen look absolutely amazing. Some of the big battles that they've done in the past couple of seasons, they rival almost 90% of the stuff that I have seen in cinema. So basically, they have been able to do very small, intimate fights that are great, well choreographed. They get the right talent in there. They know how to figure that out, but they're also able to shoot large scale combat. And I want to take this one step further, and I sort of go over this in my Old Republic video, but a lot of this stuff is hand to hand with swords. There's bow and arrows, there's castles, sieges, that kind of warfare. And I think that lends itself so perfectly to the Old Republic era, because you're going to have armies of Sith and armies of Jedi, and it's going to be very interesting to see how that would all play out. But even if they don't do the Old Republic, I'm going to go ahead and say that Dan and Dave will be able to put the team together to give us incredible lightsaber duels, incredible star fights, just absolutely incredible action, because you can't forget, it is Star Wars. You need a war, you need action to make these stories work. All right, let's talk about the Backlash a little bit here. And honestly, I really don't like talking about stuff like this, especially when it has like a political spin on it. But let's go over it, and I'll tell you honestly how I feel. By the way, disclaimer, all of these thoughts are just my opinions. I mean, that should go without saying, but I'm not speaking from some moral high ground. I'm just telling you the way that I see it, and I think that's part of the cool thing about YouTube, at least for now. But whatever. So the backlash surrounding Dan and Dave's hiring has to do with the fact that Lucasfilm, especially under Kathleen Kennedy, has majorly hired white men to write, produce, and direct their films. And what's really interesting about this, just for me, is basically Disney is kind of getting it from both fronts, right? There are a lot of people that think they're playing identity politics by having Rey as the main character. One of the big complaints about The Last Jedi, which I think is actually really unfounded, was the whole social justice warrior thing. I just don't see it in there. I'm sorry, I just don't. But there is a effort to be more representative in their casting, and that has been good, but it has caused them some backlash. Now, this is very interesting because now they're getting backlash from the progressive side of things. There are people out there that are really, really pissed that Disney is only hiring men and white men to direct and produce these films. And my honest to God opinion on this is like, this is why identity politics are kind of whack, and why the politicizing of everything is kind of stupid. Let me tell you the honest to God truth. The reason most of these junkets are putting up articles about how Disney hires 94% white men, Disney doesn't practice what they preach, they're not actually putting diversity in it. The reason they are writing those articles is not because they are passionate about the problem, it is because they know you will click on it, and they know because of the political environment out there that it will get them views and clicks, okay? So I think a lot of that stuff is disingenuous. Now, having said that, I think representation is very important. I do think that there should be an effort made to bring in more diversity when you're talking about writing, producing, and directing. However, Dan and Dave are like so clearly overqualified to do this. Grabbing this talent is a sign that Disney is willing to let real powerful creative force come in and put their spin on this. I'll just say this, there's very few people out there like on the planet that are like a production team that I would say are on the level of Dan and Dave. Like it literally, if you had the gamut, if you could hire anyone, I'm talking like Kevin Feige, Patty Jenkins, like Ryan Coogler, all the biggest and Taika Waititi, people that I think are just absolutely creative forces. If I'm in a room with all of those people and I have to hire them for producing a series of films, Dan and Dave are probably going to beat every single person that's out there. I think they are so clearly a great get for it that it is an absolute shame that we have to be political about this and cause an uproar. By the way, they're not, at least to my knowledge, directing these films. They are writing and creating. They're producing. So it's very possible that they will have female directors. I know that a few female directors have met with Lucasfilm. They could have Ryan Coogler. They could have anybody direct these films. I think it's way too soon to be like, this is just another white male driven thing. So I don't know. Those are just some of my thoughts on it. Like I said, I think it's kind of politicized out there. Now, the other part of the backlash is people that are actually hardcore Game of Thrones fans, mostly readers, if I'm reading this correctly, that feel as though Dan and Dave are really great when they adapt the writing, but when they no longer had the books, that they sort of had some missteps, that they basically aren't very good on their own, that they need great source material to work from. I completely disagree with that. I actually think that the Game of Thrones show got much better when they went off book. Now, there was a stumbling in tone and pacing when it first happened because I literally believe they had to pull back and sort of decide the future of their series. But season 6, insane. It was absolutely insane. And I think that, I have a lot of problems with season 5, but I think that the pacing of the show, writing good television, continuing to produce good action, and the overall narrative that they're trying to get to is incredibly well done. So I actually don't buy that at all. Besides, you want to talk about great source material. I mean, you've got one of the best trilogies in cinema history in the original trilogy, and you have a whole bunch of expanded universe material that is absolutely incredible. We know that a lot of these creators in Star Wars right now are grabbing stuff from the expanded universe and bringing it into canon. So I think there's plenty of source material there. But I want to sort of stop it there. I've been rambling just a little bit, so I don't want to get too crazy on it. But those are my thoughts on why this is so awesome, what I think about the backlash, and I am curious to hear what everybody has to say about the backlash, about what they think Dan and Dave are going to be able to do with Star Wars. Let's have a conversation about this. But can we be nice to each other? That'd be cool. That'd be like a really cool change of pace on the internet. I'd like that. All right, let's check that nerd card really quickly. I want to know, what are the names of Daenerys's 3 dragons from Game of Thrones? Answer that question in the comment section below. As I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.